The baby's screams pierced through the howling Wyoming blizzard like a knife through silence. Jonas Hale, a man who'd once commanded respect across 3 counties, now stood at his gate in the freezing darkness, painting words that burned his pride to ash. "Need mother's milk, please." His wife lay cold in the ground. His newborn son was dying in his arms. And somewhere across that snow-blind ridge, a woman who'd buried her own child heard those cries and felt milk surge through her breasts like an answered prayer she'd never dared to speak. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind had teeth that winter. That's what the old-timers said about Wyoming territory in 1881, and Jonas Hale believed every word as he stood in his doorway, watching the snow devour his land one white breath at a time. The wind didn't just blow, it bit, it clawed, it screamed like something alive and hungry. And tonight, it had competition. His son was screaming too. Jonas held the tiny bundle against his chest, feeling the baby's body shake with each wail, those small fists beating against his collarbone like accusations. 3 days. 3 days since Margaret had taken her last rattling breath, her hand going cold in his even as the midwife placed their son in her lifeless arms for one brief, terrible moment. 3 days since he'd become both father and mother to a child who refused to accept half measures. The baby wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just cried and cried until Jonas thought his own mind would crack like ice on a pond. He'd tried everything. Goat's milk mixed with sugar water. The baby choked and screamed louder. Milk-soaked cloth to suck on, thrown aside with surprising strength for something so small. The neighbor woman, Mrs. Brennan, had come by with some concoction her grandmother swore by, but the baby projectile vomited it across Jonas's shirt and screamed until Mrs. Brennan fled, making the sign of the cross. "Some babies just don't take to substitutes," she'd said, backing toward her wagon. "They need what they need, Mr. Hale. Mother's milk or nothing." "Then find me a wet nurse," Jonas had begged, his voice cracking. "Please, I'll pay anything." Mrs. Brennan's face had softened with pity, which somehow made it worse. "Every woman with milk around here is feeding her own, Jonas. Times are hard. Nobody's got extra to spare, not even for money." That had been yesterday. Or maybe the day before. Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing in strange ways. Jonas hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch since Margaret died. He'd pace the cabin, bounce the baby, sing songs he half remembered from his own childhood, pray to a God he wasn't sure was listening. Nothing worked. The baby just screamed and screamed and screamed. Jonas looked down at his son's face, red and twisted with rage or hunger or grief, maybe all 3. The baby had Margaret's nose, he'd noticed. That small, slightly upturned nose that had made her look perpetually curious about the world. Seeing it on his son's face was a knife that twisted every time. "I don't know what to do," Jonas whispered to the screaming infant. "I don't know how to keep you alive." The cabin felt smaller by the hour, closing in on him like a coffin. Everywhere he looked, he saw Margaret, her sewing basket by the chair, her apron hanging on its peg, her hairbrush still tangled with long brown strands on the dresser. He'd meant to clear these things away, to make the house bearable, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Removing her things felt like erasing her, and erasing her felt like dying himself. The fire was burning low. Jonas added another log with one hand, still bouncing the baby with the other. The wood was running low too, another problem for another moment. Right now, his entire world had narrowed to this. Keep the baby alive through the night, then through the next hour, then the next. He'd knocked on every door within riding distance. The Johnsons, the Pratts, the Wainwrights, even old Dutch Henry who lived like a hermit up in the rocks. Everyone had the same story. No milk to spare, sorry for your loss, God bless, goodbye. Their pity felt like stones in his pockets, dragging him down. Jonas Hale had built this ranch from nothing. He'd fought off claim jumpers, survived 2 harsh winters, broke horses that other men said couldn't be broken. He'd earned respect through sweat and blood and stubbornness. But none of that mattered now. All his strength, all his pride, all his carefully constructed life. Useless in the face of one tiny, starving human who just needed something Jonas couldn't provide. The baby's cries reached a new pitch, a desperate quality that made Jonas's stomach clench with fear. The sound was getting weaker. Not quieter, weaker, like the baby was running out of strength to scream. That was worse. So much worse. "All right," Jonas said, his voice rough. "All right, son. I hear you, and I'm going to fix this." He didn't know how, but he said it anyway, because what else could he do? Jonas bundled the baby tighter against the cold, wrapped himself in his heavy coat, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. Snow stung his face, already accumulating in drifts that reached his knees in places. The barn was barely visible through the white curtain of the blizzard. He pushed through anyway, one hand shielding the baby's face. In the barn, his mare, Birdie, nickered nervously. The other animals had huddled together for warmth: 2 cows, 3 goats, and a pig that Margaret had named Beatrice for reasons she'd never explained. Jonas milked one of the goats, his fingers clumsy with cold and exhaustion. The baby screamed the entire time, the sound echoing in the barn's rafters. Even the animals seemed disturbed by it, shifting and snorting. Back in the cabin, Jonas heated the milk carefully, testing it on his wrist the way Margaret had shown him when they'd fostered a calf one spring. He dipped a clean cloth in the warm milk and tried to get the baby to suck on it. The baby turned his head away, screaming. "Come on," Jonas begged. "Please, please, son, just try it." But the baby wouldn't, or couldn't. Jonas wasn't sure which was worse. An hour passed, then another. The goat's milk grew cold. The baby's cries grew weaker still, interrupted now by alarming pauses where he seemed to forget to breathe, then gasp back to life with a wail. Jonas felt panic rising in his chest like floodwater. This was how it would end, not with some dramatic moment, but with slow, inevitable failure. His son would simply fade away, crying himself to death while Jonas held him uselessly. "No," Jonas said aloud. "No. I won't let you go. Do you hear me? I won't." But what choice did he have? The answer came to him slowly, painfully, like pulling a splinter from deep under the skin. It meant swallowing every bit of pride he had left. It meant becoming an object of pity, maybe even ridicule. It meant publicly admitting his complete helplessness. Jonas laid the baby in the drawer he'd been using as a makeshift cradle, gently, so gently, and pulled on his coat again. He found a scrap of woodboard and a brush with some old paint that Margaret had used to mark the feed sacks. His hands shook as he painted the words, forming each letter with painstaking care despite his exhaustion. "Need mother's milk, please." He stared at the sign for a long moment. The paint was already drying, the words stark and impossible to take back. This was who he was now. A man begging strangers for help he couldn't pay for, couldn't earn, could only plead for. Jonas carried the sign out into the storm and nailed it to his gatepost, where anyone passing on the road might see it. The wind tried to tear it from his hands. Snow was already accumulating on the fresh paint. But he drove the nails home anyway, 3 hard strikes with the hammer. There. Done. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, snowflakes catching in his beard. The sign looked small and pathetic against the vast white landscape. The nearest road was half a mile away. In this storm, nobody would be traveling. Nobody would see his plea for days, maybe weeks, but it was all he had left to try. Back inside, Jonas picked up his son and held him close, feeling the baby's heartbeat against his own. The crying had weakened to whimpers now, small, hitching sounds that were somehow more heartbreaking than the screams. "I'm sorry," Jonas whispered into his son's soft hair. "I'm so sorry I'm not enough. Your mama would know what to do. She'd know how to help you." But Margaret was gone. There was just him, and he was failing. Jonas lowered himself into the rocking chair, Margaret's chair, and began to rock slowly. The baby made small, desperate sounds, rooting against his chest for something that wasn't there. Jonas felt tears sliding down his face, hot against his cold-stung cheeks. He'd faced down wild stallions. He'd set his own broken leg once, 20 miles from help. He'd held Margaret's hand while she died, watched the light leave her eyes, and somehow kept breathing afterward. But this feeling of utter helplessness, of watching his child fade and being unable to stop it, this was going to break him. The storm howled louder, shaking the cabin's walls. The wind found every gap and crack, whistling through with icy fingers. The fire flickered. Jonas should get up, add more wood, keep the warmth alive. But he couldn't move. He could only rock and hold his dying son and listen to the dual screams of wind and infant crying out against the unfairness of the world. He must have dozed off, just for a moment, because suddenly he jerked awake to find the fire had burned down to embers and the cabin had gone cold. The baby had stopped crying. Jonas's heart stopped too for just a second. He looked down in terror, certain he'd find... But no. The baby's chest was moving, tiny, shallow breaths. He was alive, but barely, too weak even to cry anymore. "No," Jonas said, his voice cracking. "No, no, no. Stay with me. Stay with me, son." He stood up too fast, dizzy with exhaustion and fear. He needed to revive the fire, needed to keep the baby warm, needed to do something, anything. That's when he heard it. Through the screaming wind, through the rattle of the shutters and the groan of the cabin's timbers, he heard something else. A sound so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination. Footsteps. In the snow. Jonas rushed to the window, baby clutched to his chest. At first, he saw nothing but white darkness and swirling snow. Then a shape emerged from the storm, a figure wrapped in dark cloth moving slowly toward the cabin. His first thought was that it was death itself, come to collect his son. His second thought was hope, desperate and painful. He stumbled to the door and wrenched it open. The wind roared in, bringing snow and cold and the shrouded figure with it. Jonas couldn't see a face, just layers of shawl and coat and wool wrapped tight against the storm. "Please," Jonas started to say, but his voice failed him. The figure stepped inside and pushed back the layers of cloth covering her face. It was a woman, someone Jonas recognized vaguely as living somewhere on the ridge beyond his northern pasture. He'd seen her at a distance a few times, but they'd never spoken. She was probably in her late 20s with dark hair plastered to her face by melting snow and eyes that looked haunted and fierce at the same time. "The baby," she said. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. "Let me try." Jonas just stared at her, not quite believing she was real. Maybe he had fallen asleep. Maybe this was a dream or a hallucination brought on by days without sleep. But then she moved forward and held out her arms, and the gesture was so real, so immediate and practical, that Jonas found himself handing over his son without quite meaning to. The woman, Nora, her name was Nora Delaney, that was it, sat down in Margaret's rocking chair and began unwrapping the baby from his blankets. Her hands moved with surprising efficiency, checking him over with a practiced eye. "When did your wife die?" she asked. 3 days ago. Fever, after the birth." Nora nodded, still focused on the baby. "And he hasn't eaten since? Won't take goat's milk. Won't take anything. I've tried everything I know." "Sometimes they won't," Nora said quietly. She unbuttoned her dress with one hand, matter of fact, no hesitation or embarrassment. "Sometimes they need what they need, and nothing else will do." Jonas turned away, a lifetime of propriety warring with desperate hope. He heard fabric rustling, heard the woman make soft, shushing sounds, and then silence. Not the terrible silence of the baby too weak to cry. A different kind of silence. The silence of a problem being solved, a need being met. Jonas turned back slowly. The woman, Nora, was nursing his son. The baby was latched on, drinking with desperate urgency, one tiny fist curled against her breast. Tears were streaming down Nora's face, but her expression was calm, almost peaceful. "How..." Jonas's voice came out as a whisper. "How do you still have milk?" Nora didn't answer right away. She just rocked gently, watching the baby feed, her tears falling silently. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, for the first time in 3 days, there was peace. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I had a baby, 2 months ago. He was too small, came too early." "I'm sorry," Jonas said, the words feeling painfully inadequate. "The milk came anyway," Nora continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "It doesn't know. Your body doesn't know when there's no baby to feed. It just keeps making milk, and there's nowhere for it to go." She looked up at Jonas then, and he saw such raw grief in her eyes that he had to look away. "I heard him crying," she said. "Your son. I heard him from my cabin across the ridge, and my body..." She trailed off, looking back down at the baby. "I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it wasn't my concern, but every time he cried, I felt the milk let down, and it hurt so much. Not just my body, but I had to come. I had to try. Jonas sank down onto the bench by the door, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. He watched his son nursing, watched the woman who was saving his life, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "Thank you," he said, and it came out broken. "Thank you. I can't." "Don't," Nora said softly. "Don't say anything. Let me just do this." So Jonas sat in silence and watched as his son drank his fill. The baby's color improved before his eyes, the red, anguished look fading to healthy pink. Those tiny fists relaxed, and the frantic, desperate nursing slowed to something more peaceful. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, the baby's eyes drifted closed. He was still nursing, but more slowly now, almost drowsily, content. "He's had enough for now," Nora said. She gently broke the latch and adjusted her dress, then held the baby against her shoulder and patted his back. A moment later, the baby burped, loud and satisfied, and Nora smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but real. She stood and placed the sleeping baby in Jonas's arms. The infant was warm and heavy with sleep, completely relaxed for the first time since Margaret died. "I should go," Nora said, wrapping her shawls back around herself. "Wait," Jonas said. "The storm. You can't go back out in this. Stay, please. At least until morning." Nora hesitated, looking toward the door where the wind rattled the frame. Jonas could see her weighing options, considering proprieties that seemed absurd given what had just happened. "I'll sleep by the fire," Jonas added. "You can have the bed. I wasn't sleeping anyway." Still, she hesitated. "He'll be hungry again in a few hours," Jonas said quietly. "Please." That decided her. She nodded, unwrapping her shawls. "Just until morning, when the storm breaks." But they both knew the storm wasn't going to break by morning. Winter storms in Wyoming could last for days, even weeks, and the baby would need to eat again long before any storm passed. Jonas built up the fire while Nora stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin, dripping melted snow onto the floor. He could see her taking in the details of his life. Margaret's things still scattered everywhere, the unwashed dishes piled in the basin, the general chaos of a man barely holding things together. "There's food," Jonas said, gesturing toward the cold stove. "Not much, but you're welcome to it. And water in the kettle, if you want tea." "Thank you." They moved around each other carefully, like strangers at a dance who don't quite know the steps. Jonas heated water for tea while Nora accepted a piece of bread and some cheese. They ate in silence, the baby sleeping peacefully in his makeshift cradle for the first time in days. "What's his name?" Nora asked eventually. Jonas realized with a shock that he hadn't named his son yet. He and Margaret had discussed names, but they'd never decided, always saying they'd know when they saw the baby. And then Margaret had died, and somehow, in the chaos and grief, naming the baby had seemed impossible. What right did he have to name this child without Margaret there to agree? "He doesn't have one yet," Jonas admitted. Nora looked surprised, but she didn't judge. "That's all right," she said. "Names can wait until you're ready." They fell silent again. The wind howled. The fire crackled. Jonas sipped his tea and tried not to stare at this stranger who had saved his son's life. "The baby you lost," Jonas said hesitantly. "Did he have a name?" Nora's hands tightened around her cup. For a moment Jonas thought she wouldn't answer, then quietly, "Thomas, after my father." "That's a good name." He never heard it. He lived for 3 hours, and I told him his name, but he couldn't. She stopped, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry," Jonas said again. "Everyone's sorry," Nora said, and there was a sharp edge to her voice now. "Everyone's sorry, but it doesn't change anything. Being sorry doesn't bring him back. It doesn't make the milk stop coming. It doesn't make the pain go away." "No," Jonas agreed. "It doesn't." They sat with that truth between them, two people drowning in grief, temporarily surfacing in each other's presence. The baby stirred in his sleep, making small sounds. Both Jonas and Nora tensed, waiting to see if he'd wake crying again. But he settled, and the cabin returned to its tenuous peace. "You can take the bed," Jonas said. I'll keep watch out here. Keep the fire going." Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and disappeared into the small bedroom. Jonas heard the bed creak as she lay down, heard her sigh. Whether from relief or sorrow, he couldn't tell. Jonas pulled Margaret's rocking chair closer to the fire and settled in, the baby's cradle within arm's reach. He should sleep while he could, he knew, but his mind was too full. He kept replaying the moment when Nora had walked out of the storm. How close had they come to disaster? Another hour? 2? How much longer could the baby have survived? He looked down at his sleeping son. The baby's face was peaceful now, lips slightly parted, one fist curled under his chin. He looked like Margaret when she slept. The thought made Jonas's chest ache. "You're going to make it," Jonas whispered to his son. "You hear me? You're going to live." It felt like a promise and a prayer all at once. The storm raged on through the night. Jonas dozed in the chair, waking every time the baby stirred or the wind hit the cabin with particular force. Around 3 a.m, the baby woke crying. Not the desperate, anguished screams of before, but a normal, hungry baby cry. Jonas rose to get him, but Nora appeared from the bedroom before he could, still wrapped in her shawl. Without a word, she took the baby and settled back into the rocking chair, feeding him in the firelight while Jonas added another log to the flames. They didn't speak. There was something almost sacred about the quiet, about this small pocket of warmth and survival in the midst of the storm's fury. Jonas watched his son nursing and felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but maybe the first tiny possibility of it. The knowledge that he wasn't completely alone in this. When the baby finished and fell back asleep, Nora returned him to his cradle and went back to bed. Jonas resumed his vigil by the fire, listening to the wind and thinking about the strange mercy of the universe, sending help from such an unexpected quarter. By morning, the storm had not abated. If anything, it had grown worse. Snow was piled against the cabin door, and the windows were completely covered. They were snowed in, at least for the day. Nora emerged from the bedroom looking drawn and tired. She fed the baby twice more that day, always in the same silence, always with tears streaming down her face. Jonas tried not to watch, tried to give her what privacy he could in the small cabin, but it was impossible not to see her grief, raw and fresh as his own. Between feedings, they worked together with an unspoken coordination. Jonas brought in wood from the covered pile near the back door. Nora cleaned the dishes and tidied the cabin, moving Margaret's things to one side. Not putting them away, Jonas noticed, just organizing them respectfully. He was grateful for that. He wasn't ready to put Margaret away yet. They ate simple meals, bread, cheese, some preserves Margaret had put up last summer. Jonas tried not to think about how those preserves had been meant to feed a family of 3 through the winter. Margaret had been so proud of them, so certain they'd see them through until spring. "Do you live alone?" Jonas asked during a quiet moment while the baby slept. Nora nodded. "My husband left 2 years ago, said he was going to find work in California. Never came back." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a mean drunk. I was relieved when he didn't come back." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "How do you manage out here alone?" "Same as anyone. Work hard. Try not to think too much." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Same as you'll have to do now, I imagine." Jonas nodded. She was right, of course. This was his life now, raising a son alone, keeping the ranch going, surviving. One day at a time, one feeding at a time, one breath at a time. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day. Jonas went outside to dig out the door and assess the damage. Snow had drifted higher than the fence posts in places. The barn was buried on one side. It would take days to dig out properly, and the work would be hard with a newborn to care for. Nora appeared beside him, wrapped in her shawls. "I should go home. Check on my animals." Jonas nodded, even though something in him wanted to protest. The thought of being alone again, of having to figure out how to feed his son without her help, it terrified him. "Will you come back?" he asked, hating how desperate he sounded. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Twice a day," she said finally. "Morning and evening. I'll bring milk." "I can pay you. Whatever you need." "No!" She cut him off firmly. "No money. I'm not doing this for money." "Then what?" I'm doing it because my breasts hurt, she said bluntly. Because I hear your baby cry and my body responds whether I want it to or not. Because... She trailed off, looking away across the snow-covered valley. Because maybe feeding him helps. Maybe it gives Thomas's milk a purpose. Maybe it means something. Jonas wanted to say thank you, wanted to express the depth of his gratitude, but he could see that she didn't want his thanks, so he just nodded. Nora left shortly after, trudging through the deep snow toward her own cabin on the ridge. Jonas watched her go, then went back inside to his son, who was starting to fuss with hunger. The baby cried, and Jonas had to pace with him, bouncing and shushing, for nearly an hour before Nora could possibly return. But knowing she would return, knowing that help was coming, made it bearable in a way it hadn't been before. When Nora appeared at his door again that evening, carrying a jar of warm goat's milk and a small basket of eggs, Jonas felt something in his chest ease. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of survival. She fed the baby without ceremony, then showed Jonas how to warm the goat's milk to the right temperature, how to store it properly, how to supplement between her visits. He'll fight it at first, she warned. He'll want only the breast. But if you're patient, he'll learn to take the bottle too. He needs to, or you'll never have any freedom. So Jonas learned. He learned how to hold the bottle at the right angle, how to burp his son, how to swaddle him tight enough to feel secure but not so tight he couldn't breathe. He learned the difference between hungry cries and tired cries and uncomfortable cries. He learned how to function on 2-hour stretches of sleep. And Nora came, every morning and every evening, trudging through the snow in her worn coat and boots. She fed the baby, left milk, and departed with minimal conversation. Sometimes she stayed for tea. Sometimes she didn't. But she always came. The weeks passed. The baby gained weight, grew stronger, started staying awake for longer periods. Jonas learned to manage the ranch work in between feedings, though he had to let some things go. The horses got less attention than they needed. The repairs he'd meant to do before spring would have to wait. But they survived. One morning, Jonas noticed that Nora's coat sleeve was torn badly, the fabric hanging loose and the stuffing visible. That evening, after she left, he spent an hour carefully stitching it closed. When she arrived the next morning, he handed it to her without comment. Nora looked at the mended sleeve, then at Jonas. Something passed between them, recognition perhaps of kindness given and received. "Thank you," she said quietly. The next day, Jonas found the broken eave of his roof had been mended, and he knew without asking that Nora had done it. They began leaving small gifts for each other, a jar of jam, a repaired tool, a bundle of kindling. Never with explanation, never with fuss, just quiet gestures of care that made the harsh days slightly more bearable. Spring seemed impossibly far away. The snow kept coming. The wind kept howling. But in the small, warm cabin, with a baby growing stronger by the day, Jonas began to feel the faintest stirring of something he'd thought was dead forever. Not happiness. Not yet. But hope. The fragile, tentative hope that maybe, somehow, they would all survive this winter, together. The morning Nora didn't come, Jonas knew something was wrong. He'd been awake since before dawn, the baby fussing in that particular way that meant he was building up to a real cry. Jonas had tried the bottle first, warming the goat's milk to exactly the right temperature the way Nora had shown him, but his son had pushed it away with surprising strength for something so small, turning his head and whimpering with frustration. I know, Jonas murmured, pacing the cabin with the baby against his shoulder. "She'll be here soon, just hold on a little longer." But the sun climbed higher, and Nora didn't appear. The baby's whimpers turned to cries, then to full-throated wails. Jonas kept going to the window, looking out across the snow-covered ridge toward where he knew her cabin stood, just barely visible as a dark shape against the white landscape. By mid-morning, the baby was inconsolable, and Jonas was fighting panic. Something had happened. Something was wrong. Nora had never missed a feeding, not once in the 6 weeks since she'd first appeared at his door during the storm. Jonas bundled the screaming baby into every blanket he could find, wrapped himself in his heavy coat, and set out across the snow. The drifts were deep still, some places reaching his thighs, and carrying the baby while breaking trail was exhausting work, but fear drove him forward. "It's all right," he kept saying to his son, though the baby couldn't possibly hear him over his own screaming. We're going to find her. She'll know what to do. The trek that might have taken 15 minutes in summer took nearly 45 in the deep snow. By the time Jonas reached Nora's cabin, his legs were shaking with effort, and his arms ached from holding the baby. But none of that mattered when he saw the state of the place. The cabin was smaller than his, barely more than a shed really, with one broken window covered by a scrap of oilcloth that flapped in the breeze. Snow had drifted against the door. No smoke came from the chimney. "Nora," Jonas called, pounding on the door. "Nora, it's Jonas Hale. Are you there?" No answer. Just the baby's cries and the whistle of wind through the pines. Jonas tried the door and found it unlocked. He pushed inside, blinking in the dimness. The cabin was freezing, colder inside than out it seemed, and dark except for thin light filtering through cracks in the walls. As his eyes adjusted, he saw her. Nora was lying on a narrow cot in the corner, curled on her side, shivering violently beneath a single thin blanket. Her face was flushed with fever, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat despite the cold. Next to the cot, on an upturned crate that served as a table, sat a tin cup of milk, still full, meant for his son, and beside it, a small wooden cross and a scrap of blue cloth. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. He understood immediately what he was seeing. This was where she'd kept her grief, her private shrine to the son she'd lost. The blue cloth must have been something of the baby's. A blanket, maybe, or a piece of clothing he'd never gotten to wear. "Nora," Jonas said, moving to her side. He shifted the baby to one arm and touched her forehead with his free hand. She was burning up. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Thomas?" she whispered. "No, it's Jonas. Jonas Hale. You're sick. How long have you been like this?" "I don't... Since yesterday, I think. Maybe longer." Her voice was weak, barely audible. "The baby, is he... Did you bring... He's here. He's fine. But you're not. When did you last eat? Drink anything?" Nora tried to shake her head but winced at the movement. "Water's frozen. Couldn't get the fire started. Too tired." Jonas looked around the cabin with growing horror. There was almost no firewood. What little food he could see, a few potatoes, some dried beans, was stored in a crate in the corner. The place was barely fit for summer living, let alone a Wyoming winter. How had she been surviving here? The baby's cries reached a new pitch of desperation, and Jonas felt torn between two impossible needs. His son needed to eat. Nora needed help. He couldn't do both at once. "Nora, I need to get you to my cabin. Can you stand?" "Can't," she mumbled. "Too heavy. Everything's too heavy." Jonas made a quick decision. He laid the screaming baby on the cot next to Nora, the only flat surface in the cabin, and grabbed the tin of milk she'd prepared. It was cold now, but it would have to do. He held it to the baby's lips, and after a moment of resistance, the baby began to drink. Not happily, and not much, but enough to quiet him to whimpers. Then Jonas turned his attention to Nora. He found a bucket near the door, broke the ice that had formed on top, and brought it inside. He used his knife to chip off pieces of ice, melting them in his hands and bringing water to Nora's lips. "Drink," he commanded. "Just a little. Come on." She drank, coughing, but got some down. Jonas pulled the blanket up higher around her shoulders and looked around desperately for anything else that might help. He found matches and got a small fire started in the iron stove, feeding it what little wood there was. The cabin began to warm, fractionally, but it wasn't enough. She needed medicine, warmth, food. She needed more help than he could give her here in this freezing shed. Jonas gathered up the baby, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep after drinking a bit of the milk. Then he bent down and scooped Nora into his arms. She was lighter than he'd expected, too light. How long had she been going hungry? "What are you doing?" Nora protested weakly. "Put me down. I'm fine." "You're not fine. I'm taking you home. This is home." "Then I'm taking you to my home." Nora tried to struggle, but she had no strength left. "Can't. Not proper. People will talk." "Let them talk," Jonas said grimly. "I'd rather have you alive and scandalous than dead and respectable." The walk back was a nightmare. Carrying both Nora and the baby, breaking trail through snow that seemed determined to hold him back, Jonas felt every one of his 34 years. His back screamed in protest. His legs threatened to give out. But he kept moving, one step at a time, because stopping meant failing, and he'd failed enough people lately. Halfway back, Nora began to shake violently in his arms, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them clicking together. "Almost there," Jonas told her, though his own breath was coming in ragged gasps. "Just hold on. Almost there." By the time he reached his cabin, Jonas was running on pure stubbornness and fear. He kicked the door open, carried Nora to his bed, and laid her down as gently as his shaking arms would allow. The baby he placed in the cradle, still sleeping despite everything. Then Jonas set to work. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. He heated water and made tea with the last of Margaret's herbs, mint and chamomile, things she'd used for fever. He found extra blankets and piled them on Nora until only her face was visible. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes calling for Thomas, sometimes for someone named James, her husband, Jonas guessed, the one who'd abandoned her. Once she cried out in pain, clutching at her chest, and Jonas realized with a shock that her breasts must be painfully engorged. She hadn't nursed since yesterday, maybe longer. The baby woke screaming again, hungry despite the small amount of milk he'd had. Jonas looked at Nora, then at his son, and felt the weight of an impossible decision. "Nora," he said, touching her shoulder gently. "Nora, can you hear me? The baby needs to eat." Her eyes opened, glassy with fever. "Thomas?" "No. My son. He needs you." Understanding flickered across her face. She tried to nod, tried to move, but couldn't manage it. Jonas made the decision for her. He gently pulled back the blankets, helped her shift to her side, and brought the baby to her breast. The baby latched immediately, drinking with desperate hunger. And Nora, even in the grip of fever, even barely conscious, seemed to relax as the pressure eased. A tear slid down her temple. "Thank you," Jonas whispered. "Thank you for keeping him alive. Now let me keep you alive. Fair trade." Over the next 3 days, Jonas barely slept. He tended the fire, forced water and broth between Nora's lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, and cared for his son as best he could. The baby was patient, in his way, seeming to understand that something was wrong. He cried less, slept more, and when Nora was able to nurse him, which was only sometimes when her fever broke long enough for her to be aware, he drank gently, as if he knew she was fragile. Jonas discovered things about Nora during those days, in the moments when fever made her delirious and her carefully guarded privacy fell away. She talked about Thomas, about holding him for 3 hours while he struggled to breathe, about digging his grave herself because she couldn't bear to let anyone else touch him. She talked about her husband, James, about the first time he hit her, about the relief she'd felt when he finally left. She talked about her mother, who died when Nora was 12, and how she'd learned to survive alone even then. She talked about loneliness, about the crushing weight of silence, about days when she'd stood at the edge of the ridge and wondered what it would be like to just step off. And then she talked about hearing the baby cry, Jonas's son, and feeling her milk let down, and how for the first time in months her body had felt like it had a purpose. Jonas listened to it all, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, spooning broth into her mouth, and keeping vigil through the long nights. On the 3rd night, her fever finally broke. She woke lucid, weak but aware, and found Jonas asleep in the chair beside the bed, the baby in his lap. "Jonas?" she whispered. He jerked awake instantly, nearly dropping the baby. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse." Her voice was hoarse but clear. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. Nora's eyes widened. 3 days? But your son is fine. You fed him when you could. I managed with goat's milk the rest of the time. He's getting better at taking the bottle. Nora tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. "I can't. I need to go home. This isn't... People will talk, Jonas. A widow and a widower under one roof. It's not... You nearly died," Jonas interrupted, his voice sharp. "Do you understand that? When I found you, you were hours away from freezing to death in that shed you call a cabin, so I don't care what people think. You're staying here until you're strong enough to walk without falling over. I can't accept your charity." "It's not charity. It's payment for saving my son's life. You think I don't know that he'd be dead if not for you? You think I don't understand that debt?" Nora looked away, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't do it for payment. I didn't do it for you." "I know, you did it for yourself, for Thomas. That doesn't make me less grateful." They sat in tense silence for a moment, the baby making small sounds in his sleep. Finally, Nora spoke again, her voice small. "My cabin. The animals. I have 2 goats, some chickens, already taken care of. I brought them here yesterday. Your goats are in my barn, chickens in the coop. I'll go back for anything else you need once you're stronger." Nora stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" Jonas looked down at his son, choosing his words carefully. 6 weeks ago, you walked through a blizzard to help someone you didn't know. You saved my son. You gave him life when I had nothing left to offer. Maybe," he paused, swallowing hard, "maybe that's just what people do. Maybe when you've lost everything, you learn to recognize the value of the people who are still standing, and you don't let them fall if you can help it." A tear slid down Nora's cheek. "I saw it," she said quietly. "In your cabin. The blue cloth and the cross. You saw where I keep him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude on your grief. No, it's... Everyone pretends he never existed. Even at church, they look away when I come in. Like grief is contagious, like acknowledging my dead baby might somehow harm their living ones." Her voice broke. "But you saw him. You saw that he was real." "He was real," Jonas said firmly. "He was your son. He mattered. His life mattered even though it was short." Nora sobbed then, deep wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Jonas set the baby in his cradle and moved to sit on the edge of the bed. He took Nora's hand in his, the first time they'd touched except in the practical necessities of care, and held it while she cried. "I couldn't save him," she choked out between sobs. "He was so small, and I couldn't save him. I tried everything. I prayed and begged and promised God anything, but Thomas he just stopped breathing, and I couldn't do anything." "I know," Jonas said. "I know. I watched Margaret die the same way, watched her slip away and couldn't stop it, couldn't do anything but hold her hand and fail her." "Do you think—" Nora looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Do you think they know? Wherever they are. Do you think Margaret knows you're keeping your son alive? Do you think Thomas knows his milk is feeding another baby?" Jonas didn't have an answer for that. He didn't know what he believed about heaven or afterlife or any of it anymore. Death had made his faith murky, complicated. But he knew what Nora needed to hear. "I think," he said slowly, "that if there's any justice in the universe, they know. And I think they're grateful. I think Margaret is grateful that a woman brave enough to walk through a storm is keeping her son alive. And I think Thomas is grateful that his mother's love is big enough to feed another child who needed her." Nora squeezed his hand hard. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat like that for a long while, 2 broken people holding each other's grief, until the baby woke and reminded them that life kept moving forward, whether they were ready or not. Over the next week, Nora's strength returned slowly. She moved from the bed to the chair, then from the chair to moving around the cabin. Jonas brought her things from her cabin, her clothes, her few possessions, the blue cloth and cross that she kept on the table beside where she slept. He'd given her the bed and taken to sleeping by the fire, and neither of them discussed the arrangement or what it might mean. They simply lived, day by day, caring for the baby together in a routine that began to feel almost natural. Jonas would wake before dawn to tend the animals. Nora would feed the baby, then start breakfast while Jonas brought in wood and water. They'd eat together, saying little, then go about the day's work. Jonas would tackle the outdoor chores, mending fences, mucking stalls, breaking ice in the water troughs. Nora would manage the cabin, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, caring for the baby. It wasn't so different from how things had been with Margaret, except that it was entirely different. With Margaret, there had been conversation, laughter, shared plans for the future. With Nora, there was mostly silence, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unsaid. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire after the baby was asleep. Sometimes Nora would sew, her needle flashing in the firelight as she mended Jonas's shirts or took in his old clothes to fit herself better. Sometimes Jonas would whittle, carving small animals from scraps of wood. They rarely spoke, but there was a kind of companionship in the quiet. One evening, about 2 weeks after Nora had moved in, Jonas looked up from the horse bridle he was repairing to find her watching him. "What?" he asked. "You haven't named him yet," Nora said. "Your son. He's almost 2 months old, and he still doesn't have a name." Jonas set down the bridle. "I know, I keep trying to think of one, but nothing feels right. Margaret and I had discussed some names, but making that decision without her seems wrong," Nora finished. "I understand, but he needs a name, Jonas. He can't be the baby forever." "Well, what would you suggest?" Nora looked surprised. "Me? It's not my place to name your son. You've been feeding him since the day he was born. You saved his life. I'd say that gives you some say in the matter." Nora was quiet for a long moment, looking at the sleeping baby. "Samuel," she said finally, "it means God has heard. In the Bible, Hannah prayed for a son, and when she finally had one, she named him Samuel because God heard her prayers." "Samuel," Jonas repeated, testing the name. It felt right in his mouth, solid and real. "Samuel Hale." "You don't have to—" "No, it's perfect. It's exactly right." Jonas looked at Nora. "Thank you for everything, for saving him, for staying, for—" He trailed off, not quite sure how to articulate what he meant. "For giving us both a reason to keep living," Nora offered quietly. "Yes, that." The next morning, Jonas rode into town, his first trip since Margaret's funeral. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to file the birth certificate that had been sitting blank on his desk for 2 months. Samuel Thomas Hale, he wrote in careful letters. Born January 15, 1881. Mother, Margaret Ann Hale, deceased. Father, Jonas William Hale. He paused with the pen, then added one more line in smaller letters at the bottom. Wet nurse, Nora Delaney, who gave him life when I could not. The clerk at the registrar's office raised his eyebrows when he saw the notation, but said nothing. Jonas didn't care. Let people know. Let them understand the debt he owed. At the general store, Jonas bought flour, sugar, coffee, and cloth for new dresses for Nora. Her clothes were worn thin in places. Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, watched his purchases with calculating eyes. "Heard you've got a woman staying out at your place," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "News travels fast," Jonas replied neutrally. "Well, it's just that people are concerned, Mr. Hale. A man and a woman, unmarried, living under one roof. It sets a certain example." Jonas set down the bolt of cloth with more force than necessary. "Mrs. Patterson, that woman walked through a blizzard to save my son's life, when everyone else in this valley turned me away. She nearly died herself because she was too busy keeping Samuel alive to take care of her own health. So if people want to talk, let them talk. But anyone who thinks there's something improper happening clearly doesn't understand what it means to survive." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "Well, I never—" "Good day, Mrs. Patterson." Jonas gathered his purchases and left before she could say more. But the damage was done. By the time Jonas returned home, he'd passed 3 separate groups of people who'd stopped their conversations when they saw him, their eyes following him with speculation. The weight of their judgment settled on his shoulders like snow. Nora was kneading bread when he came in, flour dusted across her nose. Samuel was asleep in a basket on the table, and the cabin smelled like yeast and warmth. It looked, Jonas realized with a start, like a home. Not the hollow shell he'd been living in since Margaret died, but an actual home with life and purpose. "How was town?" Nora asked. "Fine. Got what we needed." Jonas set down the supplies and pulled out the cloth. "This is for you, for new dresses." Nora stared at the fabric, her hands going still in the dough. "Jonas, I can't accept." "Consider it payment for nursing Samuel. You've been here 6 weeks and I haven't given you anything in return. You've given me a roof, food, warmth. That's more than enough." "It's not enough. Not for what you've done." They looked at each other across the table, and Jonas saw understanding dawn in Nora's eyes. She'd heard it too, the edge in his voice, the tension in his shoulders. Something had happened in town. What did they say? she asked quietly. Nothing that matters. Jonas. He sighed and sank into a chair. Mrs. Patterson made it clear that people are talking, about you living here, about what that means. Nora's face went pale. I should leave. I should have left weeks ago. I didn't want to leave Samuel, and I wasn't strong enough, but now I'm better, so I should... No, Jonas said firmly. You're not going anywhere. But your reputation, my reputation. Nora, my wife is dead, my son almost died, and I had to beg for help like a dog. My reputation is already ruined, but Samuel is alive because of you. That's all that matters. Jonas, you don't understand. If this continues, if people keep talking, they can make life very difficult for you. They can refuse to do business with you. They can make it so you can't buy supplies, can't sell your horses. The church elders could even take your land if they decide your household is immoral. Jonas stared at her. They can do that? They've done it before. To a woman 2 valleys over who was living with a man she wasn't married to. They declared her household sinful and gave her land to the church. Nora's hands twisted in her apron. I won't let that happen to you. I'll leave tomorrow. And go where? Back to that freezing shed? You nearly died there, Nora. Then I'll go somewhere else. I'll find work in town or what? We both know there's no work for a woman alone. No respectable work, anyway. They sat in heavy silence. Samuel stirred in his basket, making small sounds but not waking. Jonas watched his son, Samuel, he had a name now, and felt anger building in his chest. This is wrong, he said. You saved a baby's life. That should be celebrated, not condemned. That's not how the world works, Jonas. You know that. He did know that. But knowing it and accepting it were different things. There's one solution, Nora said quietly, not meeting his eyes. One way to make this respectable. Jonas understood what she was suggesting before she said it. Marriage. It would solve everything. You'd have help with Samuel, I'd have a home, and no one could say anything improper was happening. Marriage should be for love, not convenience. Should be. But we're both too old and too broken for should be, aren't we? Nora finally looked at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. I'm not talking about a real marriage, Jonas, just a practical arrangement. We'd live as we've been living, separate beds, separate lives, just with legal papers that keep the church elders away. Jonas thought about Margaret, about the love they'd shared. He thought about promising forever to someone else, even if it was just on paper. It felt like betrayal. But then he thought about Samuel growing up without Nora, about trying to find another wet nurse, about the very real possibility of losing his land and having nowhere to raise his son. He thought about Nora going back to that freezing cabin to live alone with her grief. Let me think about it, he said finally. Nora nodded and went back to kneading bread, but Jonas could see her hands shaking. That night, after Nora had gone to bed, Jonas sat by the fire with Samuel in his lap. The baby was awake, staring up at him with serious eyes. Your mother would know what to do, Jonas told his son. She always knew the right thing, but I'm lost, Samuel. I don't know if I can promise forever to someone else, even if it makes sense, even if it keeps us safe. Samuel yawned and grabbed Jonas's finger, holding tight. But if I don't, Jonas continued, I lose you, or I lose Nora, or maybe both. And I can't lose anyone else. I don't have it in me to survive another loss. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and Jonas sat holding his son, trying to find an answer in the flames that wouldn't come. The answer came 3 days later, but not in the way Jonas expected. He was in the barn, mucking out stalls while Samuel napped in the cabin with Nora, when he heard horses approaching. Jonas straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold, and walked to the barn door. 3 men on horseback were coming up the drive, and Jonas recognized them immediately. Pastor William Gentry in the lead, flanked by Deacon Marsh and Councilman Porter, the church elders. Jonas's stomach dropped. This wasn't a social call. He walked out to meet them, trying to keep his expression neutral. Gentlemen, what brings you out here? Pastor Gentry dismounted, his face grave beneath his black hat. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, with the kind of stern righteousness that made children behave in church and adults squirm under his gaze. "Mr. Hale, we need to speak with you. It's a matter of some delicacy." "All right, come inside. I'll make coffee." "That won't be necessary," the pastor said quickly. "What we have to say is best said out here, away from others." So they knew Nora was inside. Of course they did. Everyone knew everything in this valley, usually before it even happened. Jonas crossed his arms over his chest. "Then say what you came to say." Pastor Gentry exchanged glances with the other two men. Deacon Marsh looked uncomfortable, but Councilman Porter's face was hard and unforgiving. The pastor cleared his throat. "It has come to our attention that you are living in sin, Mr. Hale, that you have taken a woman into your home, into your bed, without the sanctity of marriage." "Now wait just a minute," Jonas started, but the pastor held up his hand. "Please, let me finish. We understand that you've been through a terrible trial, the loss of your wife, the struggle with your infant son, but that does not excuse immorality. The Bible is clear on this matter. A man and woman living together outside of wedlock is fornication, and fornication is a sin. We're not—" Jonas felt his face flush hot. "Nothing improper is happening under my roof, Pastor. Mrs. Delaney has been caring for my son. That's all." "Then why?" Councilman Porter spoke up, his voice sharp. "Has she been living here for nearly 2 months? Why hasn't she returned to her own home?" "Because she was sick. She nearly died. I wasn't going to turn her out in the snow." "Christian charity is admirable," Pastor Gentry said, "but there are limits to what is appropriate. The woman has recovered her health, has she not? Yet she remains. People are talking, Mr. Hale. They're saying that you've taken a mistress before your wife is even cold in the ground." Jonas felt something dangerous rise in his chest, hot and sharp as broken glass. "People can say whatever they want. It doesn't make it true." "Perception is often more powerful than truth," the pastor replied. "And the perception is damaging not just to you, but to Mrs. Delaney and to the moral fabric of our community. Children see these things, Mr. Hale. They learn from the examples we set." "The example I'm setting," Jonas said through gritted teeth, "is that when someone saves your child's life, you don't abandon them. When someone shows mercy, you show mercy in return." Deacon Marsh finally spoke, his voice gentler than the others. "Jonas, we know what Mrs. Delaney did for your boy. We're not ungrateful for that, but surely you can see that the current arrangement is untenable." "What are you asking me to do?" The three men exchanged another look. Then Pastor Gentry spoke, his voice taking on the tone he used for sermons. "We're giving you a choice, Mr. Hale. Either you marry Mrs. Delaney and make this arrangement lawful in the eyes of God and man, or she leaves your home, today. And if I refuse, if I tell you to mind your own business," Councilman Porter's expression grew even harder, "then we will have no choice but to declare your household immoral and unfit. As a council member, I have the authority to recommend the seizure of property that's being used for immoral purposes. We could take this land, Mr. Hale. We could take everything you and your late wife built." Jonas stared at them, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You'd take my land? Make my son homeless? For what? For giving shelter to someone who needed it?" "For living in sin," Pastor Gentry said firmly. "The law is clear on this. We've done it before, and we'll do it again if we must. We're trying to give you a way out, Jonas. Marry the woman, make it right with God, then no one can say a word against you. And if she doesn't want to marry me, then convince her," Councilman Porter said coldly. "You have until Sunday. That's 4 days. Either you both stand before Pastor Gentry and take your vows, or Mrs. Delaney leaves and we'll hear no more about it. Those are your options." They mounted their horses then, and Pastor Gentry looked down at Jonas with something that might have been pity. "I know this seems harsh, Jonas, but we're trying to save your soul and hers. Sometimes salvation requires difficult choices." Jonas watched them ride away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He stood there until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned and walked slowly back toward the cabin. Through the window, he could see Nora sitting by the fire, holding Samuel. She looked up when Jonas came through the door, and her face went pale. "I heard horses," she said. "Who was it?" Jonas told her. He watched the color drain from her face as he explained what the church elders had demanded, watched her hands tighten around Samuel until the baby squirmed in protest. 4 days, she whispered when he finished. They're giving us 4 days. I won't let them take the land, Jonas said. I won't let them make Samuel homeless. But Nora, I also won't force you into a marriage you don't want. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll figure something else out. Nora stood and placed Samuel in his cradle, then walked to the window and stared out at the snowy landscape. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet, Jonas had to strain to hear it. Everyone I've loved has died, she said. My mother when I was 12. My husband, well, he didn't die, but he left, and that's its own kind of death. And Thomas, her voice broke on her son's name. Thomas died in my arms, and I couldn't save him. I couldn't do anything but hold him and watch him go. Nora, I'm afraid, she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. I'm afraid that if I let myself care about you, about Samuel, if I let myself belong here, something terrible will happen. That's how it works for me, Jonas. I love people, and they leave. They die or they go away, and I'm left alone again. Jonas moved to stand beside her at the window. I can't promise you that nothing bad will ever happen, he said quietly. I can't promise I won't die, or Samuel won't get sick, or that life won't be hard, because it will be. Life is hard, and people die, and nothing is certain. Then why would I risk it? Because the alternative is being alone, and I think being alone might be its own kind of dying, just slower. Nora turned to look at him then, tears streaming down her face. I can't survive losing someone else, Jonas. I can't. It will break me completely. Then maybe, Jonas said, we'll just have to try not to lose each other. He pulled the ring from his pocket, the one he'd forged for Margaret's chain weeks ago, before the church elders had come, before any of this had become about ultimatums and property seizures. He'd made it late one night, melting down the silver chain in his forge, shaping it with trembling hands. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't expensive, but it was honest. This isn't for them, Jonas said, holding out the ring. Not for the pastor or the council or anyone in town. This is for us, for you and me and Samuel. A promise that we'll face whatever comes together, instead of alone. Nora stared at the ring, then at Jonas, then back at the ring. I don't love you, she said, and it wasn't cruel, just honest. I still love James, even though I shouldn't, even though he was terrible. And you still love Margaret. I know. So what would this be? What kind of marriage starts with two people who love ghosts? Jonas thought about that. Maybe the kind that's honest, he said finally. Maybe the kind where we don't pretend to feel things we don't. We'd be partners, Nora. We'd take care of each other and Samuel, and we'd build something together. Not a grand romance, just survival, and maybe more than that, eventually. Or maybe not. But at least we wouldn't be alone. Nora looked at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Then she looked back at Jonas, and something shifted in her expression. Not love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it someday. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need you to understand something. I can't be Margaret. I can't replace her or try to fill the space she left. I'll be myself, with all my grief and all my broken pieces, and that might not be what you want. I don't want you to be Margaret. I want you to be Nora, the woman who walked through a blizzard to save my son, the woman who nearly died because she cared more about a stranger's baby than her own safety. That's who I want here. Nora closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and held out her hand. Jonas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly because he'd measured it against the thread she used for sewing, checking while she slept to get it right. All right, Nora whispered. All right. But Jonas, if something happens, if I lose you or Samuel, I need you to know that I can't survive that. I'll break. So you have to promise me that you'll try to stay alive, that you'll be careful and you won't take stupid risks. Can you promise me that? Jonas took her hand in both of his. I promise I'll do my best. That's not the same as promising. No, it's not. But it's all I can honestly give you. Is it enough? Nora looked at their joined hands, at the simple silver ring on her finger, at Samuel sleeping nearby. Then she nodded. It has to be. The next 4 days passed in a strange blur. Jonas rode to town the following morning to tell Pastor Gentry they'd accept his terms, then stopped at the general store for a few supplies. Mrs. Patterson was there again, her eyes lighting up with curiosity when she saw him. "Heard the elders paid you a visit," she said, not bothering with pretense. "News travels fast." "So? What did you decide?" Jonas met her gaze steadily. "Mrs. Delaney and I will be married on Sunday. I hope you'll wish us well." Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open in surprise. Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. "Married? Well, that's very sudden, isn't it?" "Not as sudden as death," Jonas said quietly. "When you've lost as much as we have, you learn not to waste time." He left before she could respond, but he heard her calling to someone else in the store as the door closed behind him. By nightfall, the whole valley would know. Back at the cabin, Jonas found Nora in a state of quiet panic. She'd dragged out the trunk that held Margaret's clothes and was staring at them with a stricken expression. "I can't wear her dress," Nora said when Jonas came in. "For the wedding. I can't wear Margaret's dress. It would be wrong." Jonas looked at the beautiful blue dress Margaret had worn on their wedding day, carefully preserved in tissue paper. He remembered helping her out of it later that night, remembered the way she'd laughed and called him impatient. The memory hurt, sharp and sweet at the same time. "You're right," he said. "That dress was hers. You need something that's yours." "I don't have anything suitable. My clothes are all worn out, and we don't have time to make a new dress, and—" "We'll figure it out," Jonas interrupted gently. "Tomorrow, I'll ride to town again. There's a seamstress there, Mrs. Chen. She might have something, or she can alter something quickly." "Jonas, we can't afford—" "Yes, we can, and even if we couldn't, I'd find a way. You're not standing up in front of the whole town in a worn-out dress. You'll have something nice, something that makes you feel—" He searched for the right word. "Like yourself." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "I don't even know who that is anymore. I've been so many people. James's wife, Thomas's mother, your son's wet nurse. But who am I? Just as Nora." Jonas didn't have an answer for that. He suspected Nora would have to figure it out herself, and it might take years. But he could give her a start. The next day he rode to town and found Mrs. Chen in her small shop above the dry goods store. She was a Chinese woman who'd come to Wyoming with her husband to work on the railroads, then stayed after he died. She made beautiful clothes, and Jonas had sometimes brought her business when ranchers needed special orders. "Mr. Hale," she said, surprised to see him, "I heard about your wife. I'm very sorry." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I need your help. I'm getting married on Sunday, and my intended needs a dress." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she was too polite to comment on the speed of things. "I see. Does she have a preference for color, style?" Jonas thought about Nora, about the quiet strength in her, about the grief she carried, about the way she looked when she held Samuel. "Something simple," he said. "Something green, maybe, like spring grass. Something that says new beginnings." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "I have something that might work. A dress I made for a customer who never collected it. It would need alterations, but I could have it ready by Saturday evening if I work through the nights. Whatever it costs, I'll pay it." "Mr. Hale, I heard what happened about the church elders and their ultimatum." Mrs. Chen looked at him seriously. "Are you marrying this woman because you want to or because you're being forced to?" Jonas considered lying, then decided Mrs. Chen deserved honesty. "Both," he said. "I'm being forced, yes, but I'm also choosing this. She saved my son's life. She's a good woman who's known too much sorrow. If I can give her a home, a life that's better than what she had, that seems like a decent thing to do. And love? Love might come later, or it might not. But respect, gratitude, partnership, those are worth something too, aren't they?" Mrs. Chen smiled then, small and knowing. "Yes, Mr. Hale, they are. Bring your intended by tomorrow for measurements. I'll make her something beautiful." When Jonas returned home and told Nora about the dress, she cried again. She seemed to be crying a lot lately, but Jonas understood. Tears were how grief leaked out when you could no longer hold it inside. Saturday came too quickly. Nora went to town for her fitting and came back with the dress in a wrapped bundle that she wouldn't let Jonas see. Bad luck, she said, though her smile was shaky. They spent the evening in tense silence, both aware that tomorrow everything would change, though neither quite sure how. That night, after Nora had gone to bed, Jonas pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to Margaret. He'd written her several since she died, letters he never sent because there was nowhere to send them to. But it helped somehow to put his thoughts into words. Dear Margaret, he wrote, tomorrow I'm marrying Nora Delaney. I know you'd understand why, and I think you'd approve of her. She's strong and kind, and she's kept Samuel alive when I couldn't. I still love you. I'll always love you. But I'm learning that maybe there's room in a heart for more than one kind of love. The love I had for you and the gratitude I have for her and the partnership we're building. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. I hope you know I'm doing my best with our son. I hope you don't think I'm betraying you by moving forward. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just trying to survive. Your loving husband, Jonas. He folded the letter and added it to the box where he kept the others, then sat staring into the fire until the flames burned low. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Jonas dressed in his only good suit, the one he'd worn to Margaret's funeral, and tried not to think about the symmetry of that. He fed the animals, brought in wood, made coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Nora emerged from the bedroom in the green dress, and Jonas's breath caught. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself. The dress was simple but elegant, with a high collar and long sleeves, the green fabric the exact color of new grass pushing through snow. Nora had pinned her dark hair up, and someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had given her a small circlet of dried flowers to wear. You look beautiful, Jonas said, and meant it. Nora blushed and looked away. It's just a dress. It's not just a dress. It's your dress. You look like yourself in it. I'm not sure I know who that is yet. Then we'll figure it out together. They bundled Samuel in his warmest blankets and set out for the church. It was a 3-mile drive, and they made it in silence, the wagon wheels creaking through the snow. Other families were arriving too, all dressed in their Sunday best, and Jonas could see the speculation in their eyes as they watched him help Nora down from the wagon. Inside the church, Pastor Gentry was waiting. So were the deacon and councilman, along with what seemed like half the valley. Jonas hadn't expected so many people, but of course they'd come. This was the entertainment of the season, the hasty marriage of the grieving widower and the mysterious woman who'd been living in sin with him. Let them look, Jonas thought grimly, let them judge, as long as they left him alone afterward. The ceremony was brief and awkward. Pastor Gentry spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about man and woman becoming one flesh, about forsaking all others. Jonas spoke his vows in a voice that only shook slightly. Nora spoke hers barely above a whisper, her hands trembling as she held Samuel. By the power vested in me, Pastor Gentry intoned, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. Jonas leaned in and kissed Nora gently on the cheek, nothing more. It felt too intimate to kiss her properly in front of all these people, too much like a lie. Nora's face was pale, but composed. Then it was done. They were married. Jonas and Nora Hale, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death did them part. The congregation applauded politely, though Jonas could see the whispers starting already. Mrs. Patterson was leaning over to someone beside her, no doubt sharing her theories. Councilman Porter looked satisfied, like he'd cleaned up a mess. Only Mrs. Chen, sitting in the back, smiled at them with genuine warmth. As they walked back down the aisle, Samuel began to cry, hungry again, always hungry. Nora shifted him to her other arm, and Jonas offered his arm to her. She took it, and they walked out of the church together into the bright cold sunlight. Well, Jonas said as they reached the wagon, that's done. Yes, Nora agreed. That's done. They looked at each other. This man and woman who were now husband and wife, bonded not by love, but by necessity and survival, and a baby who'd needed them both. What do we do now? Nora asked. Jonas helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. Now we go home, he said, and we figure out how to live with what we've done. The ride back was quieter than the ride there, but different somehow. The thing they'd been dreading was behind them now. They'd made their choice, spoken their vows, bound their lives together. For better or worse, they were in this together. When they reached the cabin, Jonas helped Nora down and she immediately went inside to nurse Samuel. Jonas unhitched the wagon and tended the horses, taking his time with the familiar tasks. When he finally went inside, he found Nora sitting by the fire, still in her green dress, with Samuel asleep in her lap. "I don't feel any different," she said quietly. "I thought I would, but I don't. I'm the same person I was this morning." "Marriage doesn't change who you are," Jonas said, sitting down across from her. "It just changes what you're called and who you're responsible to." "Are we really going to do this? Live as husband and wife?" "We'll live as partners," Jonas corrected. "The rest, we'll figure out as we go." Nora nodded slowly, then looked down at the ring on her finger. "Jonas, I need to tell you something about Thomas's grave." Jonas waited. "It's on the ridge behind my cabin. I buried him there myself because I couldn't bear to put him in the town cemetery with all those people watching. But now that I'm living here, I won't be able to visit as often, and Her voice broke. "I can't abandon him. I can't leave him there alone." "Then we'll visit together," Jonas said. "As often as you need, and in spring if you want, we can plant something there. A tree or flowers, something living to mark where he rests." Nora looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You'd do that? Even though he wasn't yours?" "He was yours, which means he's part of our family now. We'll take care of him together." That night, Jonas laid out blankets by the fire as he had been doing for weeks. Nora disappeared into the bedroom with Samuel, and Jonas listened to her singing softly to the baby, a lullaby he didn't recognize, probably something her own mother had sung to her. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been happily married with a child on the way and a prosperous ranch. Now he was married again to a woman he barely knew, bound together by desperation and a screaming baby. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but then life rarely was. From the bedroom, he heard Nora crying softly, trying to muffle the sound. Jonas closed his eyes and pretended not to hear, giving her the privacy she needed for her grief. They were married now, but they were still strangers in so many ways. Trust would take time. Comfort would take time. But at least they had time now. At least they could stop fighting just to survive and maybe, possibly, start learning how to actually live. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Spring still seemed impossibly far away. But for the first time since Margaret died, Jonas felt like maybe, just maybe, they might make it there after all. The first week of marriage was the hardest. They moved around each other like dancers who'd never learned the steps, always careful, always polite, always aware of the strangeness of their situation. Jonas would wake before dawn, dress quietly by the dying fire, and slip outside to tend the animals. When he returned, Nora would have breakfast ready, eggs, bread, sometimes bacon if they had it, and they'd eat in silence while Samuel nursed or slept. "Coffee's good," Jonas would say. "Thank you," Nora would reply. And that would be the extent of their conversation until evening. Jonas threw himself into ranch work with an intensity that bordered on desperate. He repaired fences that didn't really need repairing, reorganized the barn twice, and spent hours working with the horses even though there was no immediate need. Anything to avoid the awkward silence of the cabin, the weight of Nora's presence that felt both comforting and suffocating at once. Nora, for her part, attacked the housework like it had personally offended her. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, rearranged the pantry 3 times, and spent hours sewing clothes for Samuel that he wouldn't fit into for months. Jonas would come in to find her sitting by the fire, hands moving constantly, eyes distant with thoughts she never shared. They were 2 people living in the same small space, but occupying entirely different worlds. On the 4th night, Jonas woke to the sound of crying. Not Samuel. He'd learned to recognize his son's cries. This was different, muffled and broken, coming from the bedroom. He lay by the fire, staring at the ceiling, debating whether to go to her or pretend he hadn't heard. The crying continued, growing more desperate. Finally, Jonas couldn't stand it anymore. He got up and knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Nora, are you all right?" The crying stopped abruptly. A long pause, then her voice, thick with tears. "I'm fine. Go back to sleep." You don't sound fine. I said I'm fine, Jonas. Please just leave me alone. But Jonas couldn't do that. He opened the door carefully, giving her time to object. In the dim light from the banked fire in the other room, he could see her sitting on the bed, still fully dressed, clutching something to her chest. The blue cloth. Thomas's blanket. Nora, Jonas said gently, stepping inside. I can't do this, she sobbed, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. I can't pretend to be your wife. I can't pretend this is normal. I can't pretend I'm not terrified every single moment that Samuel is going to die, that you're going to die, that everything I touch is going to turn to ash. Jonas sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. You don't have to pretend anything. But I do. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Pretending to be happy, pretending to be a family, pretending that two broken people can somehow make one whole person. No, Jonas said firmly. That's not what this marriage is, remember? We promised to be honest with each other, to be partners, not actors playing roles. Then I'm honestly terrified, Nora whispered. I'm honestly so scared that I can barely breathe, and I'm honestly wondering if we made a terrible mistake. Jonas felt something twist in his chest. Do you regret marrying me? Nora was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally, but I regret that we had to. I regret that we couldn't just, I don't know, be two people helping each other without all the rest of it. We still can be. The piece of paper doesn't have to change anything. But it does change things. Now, when I nurse Samuel, I'm not just helping. I'm being a mother to him. And that terrifies me because what if I fail? What if I can't keep him alive? What if— Stop, Jonas interrupted gently. You can't live your life in what-ifs. I know. I've been trying to do it since Margaret died, and it's impossible. What if I'd noticed her fever sooner? What if I'd ridden for the doctor faster? What if I'd married someone else and she'd still be alive? But none of those what-ifs change anything. All they do is make the present unbearable. Nora looked at him, her face wet with tears. How do you survive it? The fear? Poorly, Jonas admitted. Most days I'm barely holding on. But having you here, having Samuel alive and growing stronger, that helps. Knowing I'm not alone in this helps. But you are alone. We're both alone. We're just alone together. Jonas thought about that, about the distinction she was making. Maybe that's enough, he said. Maybe being alone together is better than being alone. Nora let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, well, we're pretty sad people. This time it was definitely a laugh, even if it came out broken. Nora wiped her eyes with the blue cloth, then looked at it in her hands. I dream about him, she said softly. Thomas. I dream that he's alive and healthy, and I'm nursing him, and everything is perfect. And then I wake up and remember, and it's like losing him all over again. I dream about Margaret, Jonas confessed. Sometimes she's angry with me for marrying you. Sometimes she's grateful. Sometimes she just looks at me and doesn't say anything, and that's worse than the angry dreams. They sat together in the darkness, two people bound by vows but separated by grief. And for the first time since the wedding, something shifted between them. Not closeness exactly, but understanding. Recognition that they were fighting the same battle, even if they were fighting it in different ways. Can I ask you something? Nora said after a while. Anything. Do you think you'll ever love me? Not the way you loved Margaret, but at all? Jonas considered the question carefully, knowing his answer mattered. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think I could learn to, given time, if you wanted me to. I don't know what I want, Nora admitted, except for Samuel to keep breathing and for spring to come, and for my chest to stop hurting all the time. Your chest? She gestured vaguely. From the milk. It's painful when I go too long between feedings, and sometimes it just aches even after Samuel's eaten. The midwife said it's normal, that it'll ease eventually, but right now it's just another reminder of Thomas, another way my body remembers what I lost. Jonas hadn't thought about that, about the physical pain she must be in. Is there anything that helps? Warm compresses, but I don't like to ask you to heat water at night, and I can't manage the fire myself without waking you. You should have told me. I'll heat water whenever you need it. That's what partners do, right? They help each other. Nora looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since they'd spoken their vows. "You're a good man, Jonas Hale, better than I deserve." "That's not true." "It is. I'm broken and bitter and half crazy with grief. You could have found someone better, someone whole." "I don't want someone whole," Jonas said. "Whole people don't understand what it's like to be shattered. They try to be sympathetic, but they don't really get it. You get it. That's worth more than anything else." Nora reached out then, tentatively, and took Jonas's hand. It was the first time they'd touched voluntarily since the wedding, and the contact sent a jolt through Jonas. Not desire, exactly. Something more complicated. Connection, maybe. The acknowledgement that they were in this together, for better or worse. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "For not giving up on me. For not sending me away. Thank you for keeping Samuel alive. For giving me a reason to keep going." They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, until Samuel stirred in his cradle and began to fuss. Nora released Jonas's hand and went to the baby, and Jonas took that as his cue to leave. But something had changed between them that night, some small crack in the walls they'd built around themselves. The next morning, Jonas noticed that Nora had moved Margaret's things from the bedroom into the main room, arranging them carefully on a shelf. The hairbrush, the sewing basket, the small jewelry box, all displayed respectfully, but no longer haunting the bedroom where Nora slept. "I hope that's all right," Nora said nervously when she saw him looking. "I didn't throw anything away. I just thought maybe she deserves her own space, not to be shoved in a trunk or forgotten, but honored, like Thomas." Jonas felt his throat tighten. "That's perfect. Thank you." And it was perfect. Margaret's things looked right on that shelf, like a small memorial. Jonas found himself touching the hairbrush as he passed, remembering but no longer drowning in the memories. They were becoming something he could live with instead of something that crushed him. Over the following weeks, small changes accumulated. Nora started talking more at meals, telling Jonas about her day, sharing small observations about Samuel's development. Jonas began sitting inside after dinner instead of finding excuses to work in the barn until Nora went to bed. They weren't exactly comfortable with each other, but they were learning each other's rhythms, each other's moods. Jonas discovered that Nora sang when she was happy, old songs her mother had taught her, Scottish ballads about lovers and loss. He discovered that she was afraid of thunder, something about the way her father had died when lightning struck their barn. He discovered that she had a sharp sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe, and that her laugh, when it came, was bright and unexpected as sunlight through clouds. Nora discovered that Jonas was quieter in the mornings and more talkative at night. She discovered that he had nightmares about Margaret's death and would wake gasping, trying not to disturb anyone. She discovered that he carved small animals when he was anxious, horses mostly, but sometimes wolves or bears, and that he left them scattered around the cabin like small offerings. They were learning each other, slowly, carefully, the way you'd approach a half-wild horse, with patience and caution and the understanding that trust couldn't be rushed. Then, 6 weeks after the wedding, everything changed again. Jonas came in from the barn one evening to find Nora standing at the window, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. Samuel was crying in his cradle, but Nora didn't seem to hear him. "Nora?" Jonas said, moving to pick up the baby. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer, just kept staring out at the darkening landscape. Jonas bounced Samuel, trying to quiet him, while watching Nora with growing concern. "Nora," he said again, more firmly, "talk to me." "It's his birthday," she whispered. "Thomas, he would have been 6 months old today. If he'd lived, he'd be 6 months old." Jonas's chest constricted. He'd known this day was coming. He'd even marked it on the calendar, planning to acknowledge it somehow. But he hadn't expected it to hit Nora this hard. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have said something this morning." "Would it have made it easier, knowing that we were both thinking about my dead baby all day?" Nora's voice was sharp with pain. "Nothing makes it easier, Jonas. Nothing. Not time. Not a new husband. Not even nursing Samuel. Nothing." Samuel's cries intensified, and Jonas realized with dismay that the baby was rooting against his chest, looking for milk that wasn't there. "Nora, I know you're hurting, but Samuel needs to eat." I know that, Nora snapped, turning from the window. I know he needs me. I know he'll starve if I don't feed him. That's all I am now, isn't it? A source of milk. Not a mother, not even a wife, really. Just a woman with useful breasts. That's not true, and you know it. Is it? Then what am I, Jonas? Who am I in this house? Jonas stared at her, seeing the wild edge of grief in her eyes, and knew he needed to choose his words carefully. You're Nora, he said. You're the woman who saved my son. You're the woman who's teaching him to smile. You're the woman who makes the cabin feel like a home instead of a tomb. You're Samuel's mother, whether biology says so or not, and you're my wife, my partner, the person I'm building a life with. But I don't want to build a life, Nora cried. I want Thomas back. I want my baby back, and I can't have him. And nursing Samuel just reminds me every single day of what I lost. Samuel was screaming now, his face red with frustration and hunger. Jonas felt torn between his son's immediate needs and Nora's obvious crisis. But Samuel couldn't wait, and Nora needed to face this. Then feed him, Jonas said, holding out the baby. Feed him and cry while you do it if you need to. Be angry at the unfairness of the universe while you nurse him. I don't care. But he needs you, Nora. Right now, in this moment, he needs you. Nora stared at Samuel, her face crumpling. Then she took him, almost roughly, and sat down in the rocking chair. She unbuttoned her dress and brought the baby to her breast, and Samuel latched on desperately, drinking like he'd been starved. Jonas watched Nora rock and nurse his son, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with suppressed sobs. He wanted to comfort her, wanted to fix this, but he knew he couldn't. Some grief was too big to be fixed. All he could do was witness it. After Samuel had eaten and fallen asleep, Nora carefully placed him in his cradle and then stood there, swaying slightly, looking lost. I need to go to his grave, she said. To Thomas's grave. I need to be there today. Jonas looked out the window. The sun was setting, and it would be full dark within the hour. The temperature was dropping fast. It would be bitter cold by the time they could make the trek to her old cabin and the ridge beyond. It's getting dark, Jonas said carefully. And cold. Maybe we should wait until morning. I can't wait until morning. It'll be tomorrow then, and the day will have passed and I'll have failed him again. Please, Jonas, I need to go. Jonas saw the desperation in her eyes and made a decision. All right, bundle up warm. I'll get the horses ready and ask Mrs. Brennan to watch Samuel for an hour or two. Nora's eyes widened. You're coming with me? Of course I'm coming. You're my wife. Your grief is my grief. But you didn't know Thomas. He wasn't your son. No, Jonas agreed, but he was yours. And you're mine now. So in a way, he's mine too. Fresh tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but she nodded and went to put on her warmest clothes. Jonas rode quickly to the Brennan farm and explained the situation. Mrs. Brennan, who'd softened considerably since Jonas's marriage, immediately agreed to watch Samuel. Take all the time you need, she said. And Jonas, tell your wife, tell her I lost a baby once too. A long time ago. I know what today must feel like. By the time Jonas returned, Nora was ready, dressed in her heavy coat and wrapped in shawls. They rode out together into the gathering darkness, the horses picking their way carefully through the snow. The temperature was dropping fast, their breath forming clouds in the air. The trek to Nora's old cabin took nearly an hour. When they arrived, Nora didn't even glance at the dark, empty structure. She just dismounted and began climbing the ridge behind it, moving with purpose despite the difficult terrain. Jonas followed, leading both horses, his boots slipping on the icy slopes. At the top of the ridge, sheltered by a stand of pines, Jonas saw it. A small mound of stones, carefully arranged with a wooden cross at the head. Someone, Nora, had carved Thomas into the wood, along with his birth and death dates. The dates were only 3 hours apart. Nora sank to her knees in the snow beside the grave, and for a long moment she just knelt there, silent. Then she began to speak, her voice so quiet Jonas had to strain to hear it. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "It's Mama. I'm sorry I haven't been here in so long. I've been living somewhere else, taking care of another baby. His name is Samuel, and he needs me because his mama died, just like you need me because you died." Jonas felt something break inside his chest, but he stood still, giving Nora her moment. I think about you every day, Nora continued. Every time I nurse Samuel, I think about you, about how I never got to do that for you. You tried so hard, baby. You tried to breathe, tried to live, but you were just too small, too early, and I couldn't save you. Her voice broke on the last words, and she bent forward until her forehead touched the cold stones. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you alive. I'm sorry I buried you alone. I'm sorry I moved away. I'm sorry for everything. Jonas couldn't stand it anymore. He knelt beside Nora and pulled her against his chest, letting her sob into his coat. She clung to him like a drowning person, her grief pouring out in waves. It's not your fault, Jonas murmured into her hair. None of this is your fault. You hear me, Nora. You didn't fail him. Sometimes babies die, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just cruel and unfair and wrong. But I'm his mother. I'm supposed to protect him. You did protect him. You held him. You loved him. You gave him every moment of life he could have. That's all any of us can do. They knelt there together in the snow and darkness, two grieving parents at the grave of a child who'd never had a chance to live. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge in the clear, cold sky, distant and uncaring. But between them, in the warmth of their bodies pressed together, there was something else. Understanding, shared pain, the beginning of healing. Finally, when Nora's sobs had quieted to shivering breaths, Jonas spoke again. I brought something, he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small carved horse, one of the ones he'd made during his anxious nights. I thought maybe Thomas would like to have something. From me. From Samuel's father. A gift from one family to another. Nora stared at the little horse, then at Jonas, her eyes wide and wet. You made this for Thomas? I made it for you, for both of you, so he'd know that someone besides his mama remembers him, so he'd know that he matters. Nora took the horse with trembling hands and placed it carefully on the grave, wedging it between two stones so the wind wouldn't take it. Then she turned and threw her arms around Jonas's neck, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. Thank you, she whispered fiercely. Thank you for seeing him. Thank you for making him real. Jonas held her, and for the first time since Margaret died, he felt something shift in his chest. Not the death of his old love, but maybe the first stirrings of something new. Not romance, not yet, but care. Deep, genuine care for this woman who'd endured so much and was still standing. They stayed at the grave until the cold became dangerous, then made their way back down the ridge to the horses. The ride home was quiet, but different from their usual silences. This one felt companionable, like they'd crossed some invisible line together and emerged on the other side changed. When they retrieved Samuel from Mrs. Brennan, the older woman looked at them both carefully. You all right? Yes, Nora said, and it sounded like the truth. Yes, I think we are. That night, as Jonas lay by the fire and listened to Nora singing to Samuel in the bedroom, he realized something had fundamentally changed. They weren't just two strangers bound by necessity anymore. They were becoming something more. Partners, yes, but also friends. People who'd seen each other's worst grief and hadn't turned away. It wasn't love yet, but maybe it was the foundation on which love could eventually be built. And for now, in the cold heart of winter, that was enough. From the bedroom, Nora's voice rose in song. Not a lullaby this time, but one of her Scottish ballads. A sad song about love and loss, but also about survival. About people who endured impossible things and somehow found reasons to keep going. Jonas closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, and for the first time in months, he fell asleep without nightmares. The next morning, Jonas woke to find Nora already up and dressed, standing at the door with her coat on. Where are you going? He asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. To town, she said. I need to see Mrs. Chen. Do you want me to come with you? Nora shook her head. No, this is something I need to do myself. Can you watch Samuel? Of course, but Nora, what's this about? She smiled then, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her since the wedding. I'm going to order a headstone, she said. A proper one for Thomas, with his full name and dates, and maybe a verse or a picture. Something beautiful. Something that says he mattered. Jonas felt his throat tighten. That's a good idea. And I'm going to ask if she knows anyone who can help me plant trees. Come spring, I want Thomas's grave surrounded by apple trees. So even when I can't visit, there'll be something alive and growing there, something that blooms. Jonas stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. We'll plant them together, he said. You, me, and Samuel. We'll make it beautiful for him. Nora squeezed his hands, and in her eyes, Jonas saw something he hadn't seen before. Not love, not yet, but possibility, hope. The fragile belief that maybe, somehow, they could build something good from all this grief. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For understanding, for not trying to make me forget him, for letting me love my dead baby while also caring for your living one. That's what family does, Jonas said. And as he said it, he realized it was true. They were family now. Not a traditional one, not a simple one, but a family nonetheless. Built from loss and need and the stubborn human refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. Nora left for town, and Jonas spent the day caring for Samuel. The baby was growing stronger every day, filling out, becoming more alert and responsive. He'd started smiling recently, real smiles, not just gas, and the sight of it never failed to make Jonas's heart ache with a mixture of joy and grief. Margaret should have been here to see this. But Nora was, and that mattered too. When Nora returned that evening, her cheeks were flushed with cold and something else. Excitement, maybe. Purpose. Mrs. Chen knows a stonemason, she announced. He'll carve whatever I want. And her husband has connections with a nursery that imports apple tree saplings. They're expensive, but he said he'd give us a fair price. We can plant them as soon as the ground thaws. How many trees? I was thinking 4, one for each direction. So no matter where the sun is, Thomas's grave will have shade. Jonas nodded. 4 trees. We can do that. That night they sat together by the fire after Samuel had fallen asleep, and Nora pulled out paper to sketch what she wanted on the headstone. She drew carefully, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, and Jonas watched her work, seeing the life returning to her eyes. What do you think? She asked finally, showing him her sketch. She'd drawn a small angel, its wings spread protectively, along with Thomas's name and dates and a verse, too beautiful for earth. It's perfect, Jonas said. He'll love it. Nora looked at him seriously. Do you really believe that? That he can see us, know what we're doing? Jonas thought about it. I don't know what I believe anymore, he admitted. But I think if love means anything, if it has any power at all, then yes. He knows you love him. He knows you haven't forgotten. Nora nodded and carefully folded the sketch. I used to pray all the time, she said quietly, before Thomas died. I prayed for him to live, prayed for a miracle. And when he died anyway, I stopped. I figured God wasn't listening or didn't care or maybe didn't exist at all. And now? Now I don't know. But tonight, kneeling at his grave with you, I felt something. Not God, maybe, but something. Like Thomas was there, listening, knowing we hadn't abandoned him. She looked at Jonas. Does that sound crazy? No, Jonas said. It sounds like hope, and we could both use more of that. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, and outside the window the first stars of evening began to appear. Winter still held the valley in its grip, but somewhere beneath the snow and ice, spring was waiting. Inevitable, unstoppable, just like the strange, unexpected life they were building together, one day at a time. Spring came late that year, as if winter was reluctant to release its hold on the valley. But when it finally arrived, it came all at once. A rush of melting snow, bursting buds, and air that smelled like possibility instead of ice. Jonas woke one morning in early April to the sound of water dripping from the eaves and birds singing outside the window. Actual birdsong, not the harsh cries of crows and ravens that had been winter's only music. He lay by the fire for a moment, listening, and felt something unfurl in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, but close. Contentment, maybe. Or just the absence of the constant ache of grief. From the bedroom, he heard Nora talking softly to Samuel, her voice light with laughter as the baby made his gurgling sounds. Samuel was almost 4 months old now, strong and healthy, with Margaret's nose and eyes that were starting to shift from baby blue to something darker. He'd started grabbing things recently, reaching for Nora's hair or Jonas's beard with surprising determination. Jonas got up and stretched, his back protesting slightly. Sleeping by the fire was taking its toll, but he hadn't suggested moving into the bedroom with Nora. That line hadn't been crossed yet, and he wasn't sure if it ever would be. They'd settled into a comfortable partnership, something like friendship but deeper, bonded by shared grief and the daily work of survival. But love? Romance? Those were still territories they hadn't explored. He built up the fire and put coffee on to boil, then went outside to check on the animals. The snow had melted enough to reveal patches of brown grass, and the horses were restless with the change in weather, tossing their heads and prancing in the paddock. Jonas's breeding mare, Birdie, was heavy with foal. She'd be dropping any day now, and he felt a flutter of anxiety about it. New life always brought the possibility of death with it. When he came back inside, Nora was nursing Samuel in the rocking chair, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up as Jonas entered, and he was struck by how different she looked from the gaunt, grief-stricken woman who'd collapsed in her cabin months ago. She'd filled out some, the sharp edges of starvation smoothed away by regular meals. Her eyes were clearer, less haunted. She looked, Jonas realized, almost peaceful. "I was thinking," Nora said as Jonas poured coffee for them both. "Today might be a good day to go to Thomas's grave. The ground should be soft enough to plant the trees." Jonas had been thinking the same thing. The apple saplings had arrived 2 weeks ago, and they'd been keeping them wrapped and moist, waiting for the right conditions. "I'll hitch up the wagon after breakfast," he said. "We can take Samuel with us. Make it a family trip." The word family hung in the air between them for a moment. Nora smiled, small but genuine. "A family trip," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They ate breakfast together. Eggs from their chickens, bread Nora had baked the day before, preserves that were the last of Margaret's supply. Soon they'd need to make their own, Jonas thought. Another marker of time passing, of old life giving way to new. After breakfast, Jonas loaded the wagon with the 4 saplings, shovels, a bucket of water, and the beautiful headstone that had finally arrived from the stonemason. It was exactly what Nora had sketched, white marble with an angel carved into it, wings spread protectively, and the words Thomas James Delaney, born and died January 15th, 1881. Too beautiful for earth. Nora had cried when she first saw it, but they were good tears, the kind that cleansed rather than drowned. She'd traced the angel's wings with her fingertips and whispered, thank you," though Jonas wasn't sure if she was talking to him or to Thomas or to something else entirely. The ride to the ridge took longer than usual because of the muddy conditions, but eventually they made it to Nora's old cabin. The structure looked even more dilapidated in daylight, and Jonas made a mental note to come back and salvage what he could before it collapsed completely. They climbed the ridge together, Jonas carrying the headstone, Nora carrying Samuel, both of them breathing hard by the time they reached the grave. The little carved horse Jonas had left months ago was still there, weathered but intact, and Nora touched it gently as they set down their burdens. "All right," Jonas said, trying to keep his voice matter-of-fact to ward off the emotion threatening to overwhelm them both. "Let's put this stone in place first, then plant the trees." It took some doing. The stone was heavier than it looked, and positioning it correctly required several attempts. But finally they had it standing at the head of the grave, solid and permanent. Nora knelt before it and laid her hand on the cold marble. "There you are, baby," she whispered. "Now everyone will know you were real, that you mattered." Jonas gave her a moment, then gently touched her shoulder. "Ready to plant?" Nora nodded and stood, wiping her eyes. They positioned the 4 saplings at the cardinal points around the grave, north, south, east, west, and began digging. The ground was soft from snowmelt, but still held pockets of frost deeper down, and the work was harder than Jonas had anticipated. But they kept at it, taking turns with the shovel while the other held Samuel. As they worked, they talked. Not about anything profound, just the small things that made up their daily lives. Jonas told Nora about Birdie being close to foaling, and Nora mentioned that she'd seen the first wildflowers blooming on the south slope. Samuel gurgled and grabbed at dandelions, trying to stuff them in his mouth until Nora gently redirected him. It felt, Jonas thought, like what a family should feel like. Not perfect, not without grief, but together. Facing things together instead of alone. When all 4 trees were planted and watered, they stood back to look at their work. The saplings were small still, barely more than sticks with a few leaves, but Jonas could imagine them in 5 years, 10 years, 20, growing tall and strong, their branches spreading to shade Thomas's grave, their blossoms filling the spring air with sweetness, a living memorial to a child who'd never gotten to see spring himself. "They're perfect," Nora said, her voice thick. "When they bloom, I'll bring Samuel up here to see them, every year, so he'll know about his brother." Jonas felt something catch in his throat. His brother? Nora looked at Jonas, and he saw determination in her eyes. "Yes, Thomas is Samuel's brother, not by blood, but by love, by the fact that one boy's milk is feeding another, by the fact that we're a family now, all of us together, the living and the dead." She paused, then added quietly, "And Margaret, too. She's Samuel's mother, his first mother, and I'll make sure he knows about her, about how brave she was, how much she loved him even though she never got to hold him." Jonas couldn't speak. He just pulled Nora into his arms, Samuel between them, and held them both while tears ran down his face. All the grief he'd been carrying for months, for Margaret, for the life he'd lost, for the future that would never be, poured out of him. But mixed in with the sadness was something else. Gratitude. For this strange, wounded woman who'd saved his son, for the family they were building from broken pieces. "Thank you," he managed finally, "for keeping his mother alive for him, for being willing to share Samuel with her memory." "We've both lost too much," Nora said softly. "We can't afford to lose the good memories, too. They're all we have left of the people we loved." They stayed at the grave for another hour, tidying up the site, adding some wildflowers Nora had gathered, just sitting in the spring sunshine with Samuel between them. It felt right, Jonas thought, to have this place be about life as much as death. About remembering, yes, but also about moving forward. As they prepared to leave, Nora turned back one last time. "I'll see you soon, Thomas," she said. "And I'll take good care of your brother. I promise." The ride home was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Samuel fell asleep in Nora's arms, exhausted by the fresh air and sunshine. Jonas guided the wagon carefully through the muddy ruts, and Nora leaned against his shoulder, her head resting there in a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary. They'd touched before, practically, necessarily, but this was different. This was chosen. Jonas didn't say anything, afraid that words might break the spell. He just let her rest against him and tried to memorize the feeling, the weight of her head on his shoulder, the warmth of her body beside his, the soft sound of Samuel's breathing, this moment of peace that they'd both fought so hard to find. When they got home, Jonas unhitched the wagon while Nora carried the sleeping Samuel inside. By the time Jonas came in from the barn, Nora had laid the baby in his cradle and was standing by the shelf that held Margaret's things. She was holding the hairbrush, running her fingers over the handle. "Tell me about her," Nora said without turning around. "About Margaret. I know you loved her. I know she died, but I don't know who she was. What made her laugh? What she dreamed about. I think I need to know if Samuel's going to know." Jonas hung up his coat slowly, trying to figure out where to start. He'd avoided talking about Margaret much, afraid it would hurt too much or feel like a betrayal of his new marriage. But Nora was right. They couldn't move forward if they kept pretending the past didn't exist. "She was stubborn," Jonas said finally, sitting down at the table. Lord, was she stubborn. When we met, I was breaking horses at her father's ranch in Colorado. She wanted to learn, but her father said it was too dangerous for a woman. So she snuck out at dawn every morning and made me teach her. Said if I didn't, she'd just do it herself and probably get killed. Nora smiled and came to sit across from him. "Did you teach her?" "Had to, didn't I? She was serious about that threat." Jonas felt himself smiling at the memory. She was actually good at it, too. Had gentle hands and patience. The horses trusted her. "How did you end up married?" "Her father caught us one morning, her on a half-broke gelding and me holding the lead rope. Thought the worst, of course. His daughter alone with some drifter at dawn. Demanded I marry her to preserve her reputation." Jonas laughed softly. Margaret was furious. Not at having to marry me, but at her father for forcing it. She said if she was going to get married, she wanted to do it because she chose to, not because someone made her. So what happened? I told her father we wouldn't marry, that I wouldn't trap her like that. And then I left. Jonas shook his head at his younger self's dramatic gesture. Made it about 10 miles before she caught up with me, riding bareback on that same gelding, no saddle or bridle, just a rope halter. She said she'd thought about it, and she chose me. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Nora was quiet for a moment. She sounds brave. She was the bravest person I ever knew. When we came here to Wyoming, there was nothing. Just land and sky and wind. She never complained, not once, just rolled up her sleeves and built a life with me. Jonas's voice roughened. When she got pregnant, she was so happy. Used to talk to her belly all the time, telling the baby about the ranch, about the horses, about all the things they'd do together. She had names picked out, Samuel if it was a boy, Sarah if it was a girl. Samuel was her choice? Jonas nodded. She loved the story from the Bible, about Hannah praying for a son and God finally hearing her. Margaret said that's what this baby was, a prayer finally answered. He looked at Nora. That's why your suggestion meant so much. You didn't know, but you chose the name she would have chosen. Tears were running down Nora's face. She would have been a wonderful mother. Yes, but Nora, you need to understand something. Jonas reached across the table and took her hand. She would have been wonderful, but you are wonderful. You've kept Samuel alive. You've loved him when you were still drowning in grief for your own child. You've been exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed it. Margaret would be grateful to you. I know she would. How can you know that? Because I know her, and I know she'd want Samuel to be loved and cared for, no matter who was doing it. She'd want him to have a mother's love, even if that mother wasn't her. Jonas squeezed Nora's hand. You're not replacing Margaret. You're honoring her by keeping her son alive and loved. Nora sobbed once, then pulled herself together with visible effort. I want Samuel to know both his mothers, she said fiercely. The one who carried him and the one who fed him, the one who gave him life and the one who kept him alive. They're both his mothers, and he should grow up knowing that. We'll tell him, Jonas promised. When he's old enough to understand, we'll tell him everything. About Margaret, about Thomas, about how our family came to be. The whole complicated, beautiful, broken truth of it. They sat together in the afternoon light, hands clasped across the table, and Jonas felt something settle in his chest. This was his family now. Not the one he'd planned for, not the one he'd expected, but the one he had. And it was enough. More than enough. That night, after Samuel was asleep and the cabin was quiet, Jonas did something he hadn't done since the wedding. He knocked on the bedroom door. Come in, Nora called. Jonas opened the door to find Nora sitting up in bed, mending one of his shirts by candlelight. She looked up, surprised. Is everything all right? Yes, Can we talk? Nora set down her sewing. Of course. Jonas sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly nervous. I've been thinking. About us. About this marriage. Nora's expression became guarded. All right. When we got married, we said it was just a practical arrangement. Partners, not lovers. Separate beds, separate lives, just sharing a house and a baby. Jonas took a breath. But Nora, I don't think that's what we are anymore. Somewhere along the way, we became something more. Friends, at least. Maybe more than friends. Nora's hands twisted in the quilt. Jonas, I don't know if I can... I'm not asking you to love me, Jonas interrupted gently. I'm not even sure what I'm asking. I just think we need to be honest about what this is becoming. Today, at Thomas's grave, when you called Samuel his brother, when you leaned against me in the wagon, that felt like more than a practical arrangement. It did, Nora admitted quietly. It felt like we were actually married. Not just on paper, but really married. Is that something you want? Or does it scare you? Nora was quiet for a long time. Both, she said finally. I'm terrified, Jonas. Terrified that if I let myself care about you, really care, something terrible will happen. Everyone I've loved has left or died, and I don't think I can survive that again. You might not have to survive it. Maybe this time things will be different. Or maybe they won't. Maybe we'll have 5 good years or 10 good years, and then you'll die, and I'll be right back where I was, alone and broken, and wishing I'd never let myself hope. Jonas couldn't argue with that. Life offered no guarantees, people died, hearts broke. Hope was always a risk, but he'd learned something these past few months, living with Nora and Samuel, building a life from ruins. "Here's what I think," Jonas said slowly. "I think being safe means being alone. It means protecting your heart so carefully that nothing can touch it, not pain, but not joy either. And I think that's a kind of death all by itself. Slower than the regular kind, but just as final. So what's the alternative? The alternative is risk. Is saying yes to life even though we know how it ends. Is loving people even though we might lose them." Jonas reached out and touched Nora's face gently. "I'm not asking you to love me today. I'm just asking if you're willing to try. If you're willing to risk it." Nora closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "What if I'm not brave enough? Then we keep going as we are, and that's fine too. But Nora, I've watched you walk through a blizzard to save a stranger's baby. I've watched you survive losing your own child and still find it in yourself to feed another. You're the bravest person I know, braver than Margaret, braver than me, braver than anyone. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified every single day. That's what makes it brave, doing it anyway, despite the terror." Nora opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, for a long moment. Then she reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "All right," she whispered. "All right, I'll try. But Jonas, you have to be patient with me. I'm so broken, and I don't know how to put myself back together. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll be broken together, and maybe that's its own kind of whole." Jonas stood then, giving her space, not wanting to push too far too fast, but Nora caught his hand. "Stay," she said. Just to sleep. Together. Like actual married people. I'm tired of you sleeping by the fire. I'm tired of being alone in this bed." Jonas felt his heart stutter. "Are you sure?" "No. But I'm going to do it anyway, because you're right. Being safe is its own kind of death, and I'm tired of dying." So Jonas lay down beside his wife for the first time, fully clothed, on top of the quilts, maintaining a careful distance. They lay there in the darkness, not touching, barely breathing, both terrified and hopeful in equal measure. "Jonas?" Nora's voice came out of the dark after a few minutes. "Yes? Thank you for not giving up on me, for not sending me away. Thank you for saving my son, for giving me a reason to keep living." More silence. Then slowly, tentatively, Nora's hand found his in the darkness and held on. Jonas squeezed back, and they lay like that, hands clasped, until sleep finally claimed them both. The spring days grew longer and warmer. Birdie foaled successfully, a strong colt that Jonas named Promise because that's what it felt like. A promise that life could continue, that new things could be born even after so much death. Samuel grew stronger, started sitting up on his own, began eating solid foods that Nora mashed carefully for him. The ranch work picked up as winter's grip finally loosened completely. And Jonas and Nora? They learned each other slowly, carefully, like people learning a new language. They still slept in the same bed, though it took weeks before they moved from on top of the quilts to underneath them. Weeks more before they started sleeping closer together, rather than on opposite edges. They still had hard days, days when grief ambushed them, and all they could do was survive. But they had good days too, days when they laughed together, when their hands would brush and linger, when Nora would catch Jonas watching her and she'd smile instead of looking away. One evening in late May, Jonas came in from the barn to find Nora standing by the window, holding Samuel and pointing out at something. "Look, baby," she was saying softly. "See the sunset? Those colors? Your first mama loved sunsets. She would have shown you this. She would have held you just like I'm holding you. And she would have told you that sunsets are God painting the sky just to remind us that beautiful things still exist." Jonas stopped in the doorway, his throat tight. Nora turned and saw him there. "I hope that's all right," she said uncertainly, talking to him about Margaret. "It's more than all right." Jonas crossed to them and put his arms around them both. "It's perfect." They stood like that, the three of them, watching the sun paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. And Jonas thought about how far they'd come from that terrible night when his son screamed and Nora walked through a blizzard to save him. How they'd both been drowning in grief, barely surviving, and somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other and built something from the wreckage. "Nora," Jonas said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, and he saw wariness flicker across her face. "What?" "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Nora stared at him, her eyes wide. "You don't have to say it back," Jonas added quickly. "I'm not asking for that. I just needed you to know. I love you. Not the way I loved Margaret. That was different. We were different people then. But I love you. The way you are with Samuel, your strength, your stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible. Your grief and your hope and your broken pieces and all of it. I love all of it." Tears were streaming down Nora's face. "Jonas, you don't have to say anything," he repeated. "I just wanted you to know." But Nora shook her head. "No, I do have to say something." She took a shaky breath. "I don't know if what I feel is love yet, but it's something. Something that feels like maybe it could become love, given time. You make me feel safe. You make me laugh. You see my grief, and you don't run from it. You honor Thomas. You're a good father to Samuel, and when I think about the future now, I can't imagine it without you in it." She paused, then added softly, "That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Jonas said, and kissed her. Not on the cheek this time, but properly, gently, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, Samuel squirming between them, and Jonas felt something bloom in his chest that he thought was dead forever. Not the death of his love for Margaret, that would always be part of him, but the birth of something new, something unexpected and hard-won and precious, precisely because it had been built from such broken pieces. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Samuel made an indignant sound, protesting being squished, and they separated enough to give him space, all three of them smiling. "A late bloomer," Nora said, echoing the words she'd said months ago at Thomas's grave. "That's what we are, late bloomers." "The best kind," Jonas agreed. That night, Jonas and Nora made love for the first time, not with the passionate urgency of young lovers, but with the gentle reverence of two wounded people learning to trust again. It was awkward in places, emotional in others, both of them crying at moments, but it was real and honest and theirs. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Nora's head on his chest, Jonas stared at the ceiling and marveled at the strangeness of life. How the worst thing that had ever happened to him, Margaret's death, had somehow, impossibly, led to this. To Nora. To a different kind of love, but love nonetheless. "Do you think they know?" Nora whispered into the darkness. "Margaret and Thomas. Do you think they're watching us?" Jonas thought about it. "I think if they are, they're happy for us. I think they'd want us to be happy, to live fully instead of just surviving. I hope so, because I do feel guilty sometimes, like I'm betraying Thomas by being happy." "You're not betraying him. You're honoring him by choosing life, by letting his loss mean something instead of letting it destroy you." Nora was quiet for a long time. Then, "Jonas, when Samuel gets older, when we tell him about everything, about Margaret and Thomas and how we came to be a family, what do we say? How do we explain all of this?" Jonas considered the question. "We tell him the truth," he said finally. "We tell him that families don't always look like we expect them to, that love can be born from grief, that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. We tell him that his mother, his first mother, loved him so much that even dying she fought to give him life. And we tell him that his second mother loved him so much that she fed him even though every feeding reminded her of the baby she'd lost. We tell him he's loved, that he's always been loved, by Margaret, by you, by me, that he's part of a complicated, messy, beautiful family that was forged in pain but chose joy anyway. That's a lot for a child to understand. Then we'll tell him slowly, over years. We'll take him to visit both graves. We'll show him the apple trees growing around Thomas's stone. We'll tell him stories about Margaret until she's real to him, not just a name. We'll make sure he knows where he comes from, all the love and loss that went into making him who he is." Nora pressed a kiss to Jonas's chest. "You're going to be a wonderful father." We're going to be wonderful parents. Together. The summer unfolded in long, golden days. Jonas taught Nora how to work with the horses, and she turned out to be as good at it as Margaret had been, patient and gentle. They rode out together sometimes, Samuel strapped to Nora's chest in a sling she'd sewn, exploring their land like they were seeing it for the first time. They visited Thomas's grave regularly, and the apple trees were thriving, their leaves bright green and healthy. In June, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Jonas one evening after Samuel was asleep, her hands shaking as she spoke the words, "I think I'm carrying your child." Jonas felt the world tilt, joy and terror in equal measure. "Are you sure?" "I haven't bled in 2 months. I'm sick in the mornings. My body remembers this feeling." She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Jonas, I'm so scared. What if I lose this one too? What if—" Jonas pulled her into his arms, cutting off the spiral of what-ifs. "We'll get through it together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. But Nora, try to have hope. Try to believe that this time things might be different." "I don't know how to hope anymore. Hope hurts too much." "Then I'll hope for both of us until you remember how." The pregnancy was difficult. Nora was sick constantly, exhausted, and plagued by nightmares about Thomas's death. But Jonas was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her back when she couldn't sleep, reminding her over and over that this pregnancy was different, this baby was different. Summer faded into fall, and Nora's belly grew. Samuel, now almost a year old, was walking and babbling and getting into everything. He'd started calling Nora Mama, and the first time it happened, she'd cried for an hour, good tears and sad tears all mixed together. In October, they made another trip to Thomas's grave, this time bringing Samuel to see the apple trees that were now well established. The trees hadn't bloomed yet. They were too young, but Jonas assured Nora that next spring there would be blossoms. "You were right," Nora said, one hand on her pregnant belly as she looked at the trees, "about planting something living. It helps, seeing them grow. Like Thomas is still part of the world somehow, still contributing something beautiful." Samuel, who'd been toddling around exploring, stumbled over to the headstone and patted it with his chubby hand, babbling happily. "I think he understands, in his way," Jonas said, "that this is family, that this matters." They stayed for a while, just sitting in the cool autumn air watching Samuel play. And Jonas felt, for the first time since Margaret died, completely at peace. This was his life now. This was his family. Complicated and built from grief, yes, but real and precious and worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. Winter came again, but this year they were ready for it. The cabin was well stocked with food. They had plenty of firewood, and most importantly, they had each other. Not just surviving together anymore, but truly living together. In February, on a cold night with snow falling outside, Nora went into labor. Jonas rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Brennan, the same midwife who delivered Samuel and failed to save Margaret. When Jonas arrived at her door, wild-eyed and terrified, Mrs. Brennan took one look at him and said, "This time will be different, Jonas. I can feel it." And it was different. It was long and painful and exhausting, but Nora was strong. And the baby, when he finally arrived as dawn was breaking, was healthy and loud and perfect. A boy with dark hair and Nora's eyes, screaming his arrival to the world with impressive volume. "He's alive," Nora sobbed as Mrs. Brennan placed the baby in her arms. "He's alive and he's breathing and he's perfect," Jonas finished, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his second son. His first biological child, but his second son, because Samuel would always be first in his heart. They named him James Thomas Hale, James for the husband Nora had lost, Thomas for the son she'd buried. Jonas had suggested it, wanting to honor all the loss that had brought them to this moment. Samuel, now walking and talking in simple words, was fascinated by his baby brother. He'd toddle over to the cradle and pat James's head gently, saying, "Baby, baby," with great seriousness. "You're a big brother now," Nora told Samuel, her voice full of wonder. "You have to help us take care of him." And Samuel did help, in his toddler way. He'd bring blankets when James cried, would sing his own made-up songs to soothe him, would show him toys with all the pride of an older sibling. Watching them together, Jonas felt his heart could burst. This was his family. 2 sons, one born to Margaret and saved by Nora, one born to Nora and fathered by him. And Nora herself, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd walked through a storm to save a stranger's baby and ended up saving Jonas too. Spring came, and this time Jonas and Nora made the trip to Thomas's grave as a family of 4. Samuel walked holding Jonas's hand while Nora carried baby James. When they reached the ridge, they found that the apple trees had indeed bloomed, just as Jonas had promised. White and pink blossoms covered the branches, filling the air with sweetness. Nora stopped and stared, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "look at what you grew. Look at how beautiful it is." Samuel ran to the trees, laughing and trying to catch falling petals. James gurgled happily in Nora's arms, and Jonas stood with his wife among the blooming trees, thinking about how life could break you completely, and somehow, impossibly, you could put yourself back together into something new. "A late bloomer," Jonas said, putting his arm around Nora's shoulders. "That's what you said we were, late bloomers." Nora leaned into him, watching their sons play among the trees. "Like us," she said softly. "We already did the hard parts, the grief, the survival, the learning to trust again. This is just the bloom after winter. The best part," Jonas agreed. They stayed there for hours, just being together as a family, letting Samuel run and play, feeding James when he got hungry, talking quietly about their plans for the future. They'd expand the ranch, maybe. Get more horses, plant a garden near Thomas's grave so there would be flowers as well as fruit trees. Raise their sons to be kind and brave and unafraid of grief. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those colors Margaret had loved, Jonas gathered his family close and looked out over the valley. Their valley. Their home. "Do you think we made it?" Nora asked quietly. "Do you think we actually survived?" Jonas looked at her, this woman who'd walked through a blizzard to save his son, who'd given milk and heart when she had nothing left to give, who'd learned to hope again even after hope had destroyed her. He looked at Samuel, strong and healthy, Margaret's son being raised by Nora with all the love a child could need. He looked at James, the promise of their future, proof that life could begin again even after terrible endings. "Yes," Jonas said, "we survived. More than that, we lived. We took all that grief and pain and loss and we built something beautiful from it. We became a family." Nora smiled through her tears and pulled both boys close, all 4 of them huddled together as the sun set and the apple blossoms fell around them like snow. "A real family," she agreed. "Not perfect, but real." "The realest thing I know," Jonas said, and kissed his wife while their sons giggled between them, and the wind carried the scent of apple blossoms across the valley. They were late bloomers, all of them, plants that had survived winter's worst and emerged stronger for it. And as the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Jonas thought about how the worst night of his life, his son screaming, his wife dead, his world ending, had somehow led to this moment, to love and family and second chances, to proof that even broken people could heal if they had the courage to try. The wind picked up, rustling the apple blossoms, and Jonas could have sworn he heard laughter on it. Margaret's laugh, maybe, and a baby's gurgle that might have been Thomas. Or maybe it was just the wind. But Jonas chose to believe they were there, watching, approving, blessing this strange family that grief had forged and love had saved. "Time to go home," Nora said finally, as the stars brightened overhead. Jonas picked up Samuel while Nora carried James, and together they made their way down the ridge toward the warm lights of their cabin. Behind them, the apple trees stood sentinel over Thomas's grave, their blossoms glowing white in the moonlight, a living reminder that from death could come beauty, from loss could come love, and from winter's worst storms could come spring's sweetest blooms. They walked together through the gathering darkness, no longer alone, no longer just surviving, but truly, finally, completely alive.